I stood in my son's wedding gown rehearsal with a smile on my face, knowing full well the man I married had slept with his son's bride-to-be just hours earlier. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. But what I did at the altar left the entire church frozen. People say a mother's love is fierce, boundless, forgiving. I used to believe that too, until I watched my husband brush the hair out of my future daughter-in-law's face, the same way he once did mine, and saw her blush. A soft, subtle thing, but to me it was loud. It was wrong. And I knew. I just knew. I wasn't always this still inside. I used to talk too much when I was nervous. I used to believe in confronting things the moment they felt off. But life, it teaches you. When you've lived long enough with betrayal dressed up as affection, you learn to sit with silence. You learn to listen, and to watch. The night before the wedding I couldn't sleep. Not because I was worried about flowers or seating arrangements, not because of excitement or stress, but because my husband's side of the bed was cold, and my gut was screaming truths I wasn't ready to say out loud. That morning, I zipped up her gown. Samantha, the girl who used to call me her second mom, the girl who cried in my arms the day Liam proposed. Her hands trembled, but not from joy. I held them in mine, steady as ever. I told her she looked beautiful. And she did in a way that made my stomach turn. They say betrayal starts small. A glance held too long. A touch that lingers. A smile that forgets who's watching. But I think betrayal, real betrayal, it doesn't start at all. It waits. Quietly. Like it's always been there. I stood there, surrounded by lace flowers and fake promises. My son was moments away from saying I do. My husband was pretending to give his blessing. And Samantha was about to become a bride, with a secret stuffed under her veil. I didn't ruin the wedding. I didn't throw a drink or cause a scene. No one saw it coming. Because I didn't raise my voice. I raised the truth. And I waited for just the right moment. When saying nothing would say everything. When I married Rick, I was a single mom with a 6-year-old boy and a heart still learning how to heal. I'd stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago, but Rick, he didn't feel like fantasy. He felt solid. He felt safe. He showed up when others wouldn't. He listened. He laughed at all the right moments. And most importantly, he didn't flinch at the idea of raising someone else's son. Liam took to him faster than I expected. I remember the first time he called Rick Dad. I didn't correct him. Rick didn't hesitate. He just smiled, pulled Liam close and said, "I've got you, kid." From that day on, we weren't two halves trying to make something work. We were a family. We built a home together. Nothing flashy. Nothing you'd find in a magazine. But it was warm. It was full of Sunday mornings and takeout Fridays. Rick coached Liam's soccer team. I packed their lunches with matching napkin notes. We didn't have everything, but we had each other. And in my world, that was enough. Years passed. Liam grew into a man, kind, funny, painfully idealistic. He never lost that part of him that believed in the good in people. I was proud of the way he loved, openly, fully, without fear. And when he brought Samantha home, I saw it in his eyes. He'd found his person. Samantha was sunshine. That's the only way to describe her. She lit up a room without trying. Her laugh was unfiltered, the kind that echoed from the belly. She had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the world when you talked. It didn't take long for her to win us over. Not just Liam, but me. She called me her bonus mom, and hugged me like we'd always known each other. Rick adored her too. At first, I thought it was just fatherly fondness. He said she reminded him of me when I was younger. Bright, fearless, a little messy in all the best ways. I took it as a compliment. I took everything as a blessing. The wedding planning took over our lives in the best way. Cake tastings where we all ended up arguing over buttercream versus cream cheese frosting. Late-night Pinterest scrolls with Samantha in her pajamas, squealing over flower arrangements. Rick would peek in and roll his eyes, but he always stayed longer than he needed to. We had a system. Samantha and I handled the aesthetics, Liam took care of the guest list, and Rick said his only job was to pay and stay out of the way. But he didn't. He offered ideas, booked vendors, insisted on driving Samantha to fittings when Liam was stuck at work. I laughed it off. "Look at you playing super dad," I tease. And he'd wink and say, "Anything for my future daughter-in-law." We even had this tradition. Every Sunday evening, We'd gather in the backyard with cheap wine, barbecue, and dreams. Samantha would read out quotes she wanted to use in her vows. Liam would roll his eyes and call her corny. I'd tear up quietly and pretend it was from the smoke. Rick. He'd just sit back, arms folded, smiling like he had everything he ever wanted. Looking back now, I think he did. Just not in the way I thought. The closer we got to the wedding, the more emotional I became. But it was the good kind. The grateful kind. I'd stand in front of my bathroom mirror brushing my hair and whisper, "We did it. We made it through." I believed with all my heart that we had weathered every storm. There was a day, 2 weeks before the wedding, when Samantha pulled me aside after brunch. She grabbed my hands and said, "Thank you for loving me like your own. I'm scared out of my mind, but knowing you're here, it helps." I held her close and told her the truth, that she'd never be alone in this family, that I'd protect her like I'd protect Liam, that I already loved her like a daughter, and I meant every word. At the time, I ironed napkins. I stitched Liam's pocket square by hand. I tied Samantha's veil ribbon with fingers that knew every strand of her hair. I hummed old songs as I worked and danced barefoot in the kitchen while Rick grilled in the yard. We were happy. We were full. And I never saw it coming. But sometimes, what you don't see isn't because it's not there. It's because you've trained yourself not to look too closely. Because looking too closely means you might find something you can't unsee. And I wasn't ready. Not yet. The storm was coming. But for those few precious days, I let myself believe in peace. It didn't start with something loud. Not a fight. Not a scream. Just a shift. A barely there turn in the air that only someone who's paid close attention for years could feel. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I told myself weddings are stressful. Emotions run high. People act out of character all the time when things get overwhelming. But it wasn't stress. It wasn't nerves. It was something else. Rick had always been involved, but lately it felt like he was everywhere. Every time Samantha had a meeting, Rick was there. Every time Liam couldn't make a call, Rick volunteered. Samantha needed someone to drive her to the florist? Rick offered before she even asked. Needed a second opinion on the final fitting? Rick was waiting in the car with coffee in hand. At first I thought it was sweet, maybe even admirable. He was stepping up, being present. But then I started noticing the way he looked at her. It wasn't a father's pride. It wasn't admiration. It lingered. His gaze always stayed 1 second too long. Just long enough to be noticed by someone who knew him as well as I did. Samantha began to change too. Nothing dramatic. But the sparkle in her eye dimmed around me. Her hugs became shorter. Her laugh felt forced. I chalked it up to wedding fatigue. I mean, what bride doesn't get a little snappy when everything starts closing in? One afternoon, we were finalizing the seating chart at my kitchen table. Just the two of us. I was talking about putting Rick's co-workers at table 5 when she suddenly dropped her pen and said, "Do you think it's weird that Rick's spending so much time with me?" She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. I smiled and said, "No, sweetheart. He just really wants this to be perfect for you and Liam." She nodded too quickly, then went silent. I remember that silence like it had weight. A few days later, I was folding laundry in our bedroom. Rick's phone buzzed on the dresser. Normally, I don't look. I've never been the type to check messages or scroll through someone else's privacy. But something in me, call it instinct, call it fear, reached for it. The screen was still lit when I picked it up. Just one message. From an unsaved number, but I recognized the language. I knew the tone. And I knew the name it could only belong to. Can't stop thinking about last night. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't catch. Instead, everything inside me went very, very still. I stared at those 6 words until the screen dimmed again. I stood there, surrounded by the smell of warm cotton, and the sound of the washing machine thumping below, and I knew. Rick came into the room a few minutes later, cheerful, whistling, tossing his keys on the dresser like nothing had happened. I handed him his folded shirt and said, "You got a text earlier." I didn't read it. Just saw it light up. He glanced at the phone, locked it, and shrugged. "Just wedding stress," he said. "Samantha's overwhelmed. She's just being dramatic." He chuckled. Like it was funny. Like none of it meant anything. And I stood there and nodded. Just nodded. Later that night, Samantha came over to help me box up wedding favors. She looked exhausted. Her smile was paper thin. I asked her if everything was okay, and she paused just a beat too long, then said, "Yeah, just too much going on, you know?" She fumbled with the ribbon on one of the boxes, her fingers clumsy, like they forgot how to tie a bow. When Rick entered the room to grab a drink, I watched her body go stiff. Just for a second. But I saw it. I felt it. Her shoulders tensed, and she didn't speak again until he walked out. That night after she left, I sat on the couch alone. The house was dark. I didn't turn on the TV. Didn't pour a drink. Just sat there. Thinking. Remembering. Rewinding every moment. Every smile. Every glance. Every errand he'd insisted on doing with her. Every time she seemed breathless. Like she was carrying something too heavy and couldn't put it down. There was no screaming. No discoveries that would shake the walls. Just a quiet confirmation growing louder in my chest with every hour. They thought I didn't know. They thought they were careful. Maybe they thought it wouldn't go that far. Or maybe it already had. But whatever it was no longer mine to deny. And so I watched. I watched them both. Closely. Carefully. And waited for the moment I could no longer pretend I didn't see what I already knew. The night before the wedding, the house was unusually quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels loaded. Everyone was supposed to be asleep. The final details were done. The vows had been rehearsed. The dresses were steamed and hanging. The rings were tucked safely in their boxes. There was nothing left to do but rest. But I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. I reached for Rick out of habit, but the space beside me was empty. No sound. Just cold sheets and a quiet that answered more than it should have. I told myself he was probably having a last-minute father-son talk with Liam. Maybe a drink. Maybe helping him calm his nerves. But when I got up to check, Liam's door was shut, lights off. I stood in the hallway and listened. Nothing. Just the faint hum of a night lamp and the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then I noticed it, Samantha's door. Closed. But the light was on underneath. A thin golden sliver cutting across the hallway carpet. It was almost midnight. I stood there for a long time. Just watching the light. Listening for anything. A voice. A movement. A shadow. But there was only silence. A silence I didn't trust anymore. I didn't knock. I didn't call out. I simply turned around, went back to my room, and sat at the edge of the bed. I stayed up the rest of the night. Not because I was tired, but because part of me already knew I would never look at the people I loved the same way again. By morning, everything was back in place. Rick was in the kitchen, dressed and cheerful, flipping pancakes like it was any other day. He greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and asked how I slept. I smiled. Told him I was too excited to sleep. He chuckled and said, "Big day. Let's make it perfect." Samantha came down next. Hair brushed, robe tied tight, face freshly washed, but there was something in her eyes. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't buzzing with bride-to-be energy. She was calm. Too calm. Like someone who had just exhaled after holding her breath for too long. Her eyes met mine for half a second and then darted away. We moved through the morning like actors in a well-rehearsed play. Laughing at nothing. Toasting with orange juice. Making jokes we didn't mean. Rick pulled Samantha aside at one point and whispered something. She blushed. Not the girlish kind, but the kind that carries heat and guilt. I watched from the other side of the room. I didn't move. I just watched. The bridal suite was on the top floor. While Samantha showered, I gathered her dress and accessories, made sure everything was perfect. I walked into her room and set the shoes by her bedside. And then I saw them, on the floor beside the edge of the bed, tucked halfway under the nightstand, a pair of socks. Men's socks. Rick's. I bent down slowly and picked them up. Rolled just the way he does when he takes them off. I didn't react. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. I placed them neatly on the nightstand and stepped back. On the dresser, I saw 2 wine glasses. One with a faint smear of red lipstick, Samantha's signature shade. She had worn it the day they shot their engagement photos. She said it made her feel bold. It was her color. I touched the rim with my fingertip. It was still faintly sticky. It hadn't been washed. It hadn't been there the day before. I looked around the room, suddenly noticing all the things I hadn't allowed myself to see until now. The tossed robe on the back of the chair, the faint scent of cologne, Rick's cologne, the curtain slightly open, the trash bin with 2 napkins and a used tissue stained with makeup. I stepped back out of the room, closed the door gently behind me, and made my way to the hallway where the gift bags were stacked. Rick had left his wallet on the console table earlier. Picked it up, slid it open, and there it was folded neatly inside the receipt. A hotel reservation. Same night. Same date. His name. Room 214. The check-in time. 11:48 p.m. And that was it. I didn't need a confession. I didn't need tears or denials. I didn't need to hear them say it. Every piece was right there in front of me, laid out with the subtlety of arrogance. They didn't think I'd look. They didn't think I'd see. But I had seen enough. I stood in the center of the hallway, clutching that slip of paper in one hand, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. I wasn't devastated. I wasn't broken. I was clear. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Every part of me that once reached for mercy curled inward. I realized then that this wasn't just betrayal. This was something calculated. Something deep. A crossing of lines you don't return from. I looked at Samantha differently from that moment forward. I dressed her for the wedding. I fixed her veil. I painted her lips with the very shade that stained the wine glass the night before. And I smiled. I told her she looked radiant. She said, "Thank you." Rick came in a few minutes later, kissed me on the cheek, told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I smiled again. This time I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I know, because now I had everything I needed. Not to forgive, not to confront, but to end this on my own terms." And in that moment my heart shattered, but I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I simply smiled, because I already had a plan. Speaking head, if your heart skipped a beat like mine did, hit the like button, and tell me where you're watching from. Every comment matters. There's a moment, just after heartbreak, just before rage, where everything inside you goes cold. Still. Sharp. It's not sadness. It's not even pain. It's clarity. That's what I felt as I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection with the hotel receipt in one hand and a matching silence sitting heavy on my shoulders. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream at her. I didn't tell Liam. I didn't tell anyone. Because this wasn't going to be some messy explosion of grief or betrayal. No. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I wouldn't be the one falling apart in the middle of the happiest day of my son's life. They didn't deserve my pain. But they were going to remember my silence. Rick kept playing the role. Loving husband. Proud father. He poured champagne that morning and raised his glass with that same smug little grin I used to think was charming. He clinked glasses with Samantha and said, "To the beautiful bride, and my son's forever love." Samantha barely raised her glass. She muttered a thank you without looking up. Her hands were trembling. Liam didn't notice. He was glowing, so in love with a future that didn't exist. I watched him tuck Samantha's hair behind her ear, whisper something about how lucky he was. She smiled, but her smile was tight, the kind you force through nausea. We had 3 hours before the ceremony. While everyone else went to the venue, I stayed behind with Samantha to help her dress. Just the two of us. Like we'd planned. She sat at the vanity, silent, while I curled her hair. Her eyes didn't meet mine. Her hands kept clenching the edge of the chair, like she was bracing for something. I hummed an old song, one she loved. She didn't sing along this time. I opened the box with her earrings, slipped them through her ears and said, "You'll be a beautiful bride." She whispered, "Thank you," but it barely came out. I laid her dress across the bed and unzipped it carefully. She stood, walked to the center of the room and waited. As I helped her step into it, I saw the goosebumps rise on her arms. She wasn't cold. She was terrified. I zipped it up slowly, fingers brushing the smooth fabric, 1 inch at a time. My hands shook, but not from nerves. From restraint. From holding in the storm behind my ribs. When I finished, I rested my hands on her shoulders and whispered, "It's almost time." She nodded, eyes still glued to the floor. She never once turned to look at me in the mirror. Not once. When she stepped out to take her bridal portraits, I sat alone at the small table by the window. The sunlight hit the silver frame that held a picture of the four of us. Rick, Liam, Samantha, and me. A fake family portrait. A lie with a smile. I turned it face down. Then I took out 2 sheets of thick cream stationery. The kind we saved for handwritten vows. I uncapped my pen. And I wrote. The first was for Liam. No emotion. Just the truth. Just enough detail to give him clarity but not enough to crush him. Because despite everything he was my son. My heart. And this wasn't his fault. The second was for Samantha. Not to shame her. Not to curse her. Just a mirror. A reminder. She already carried the weight. I could see it in her silence. I didn't need to punish her. She was already unraveling. I folded the letters neatly. Slipped them into separate envelopes. Wrote their names across the front. I placed them in the silk pouch that was meant to hold the emergency wedding kit. Tissues, mints, bobby pins. The irony made me smile. I looked around the bridal suite one last time. The flowers. The untouched breakfast tray. The lace gloves she said made her feel like a princess. All of it, carefully constructed to mask the cracks beneath. This wedding would go on. The music would play. The guests would clap. But at the altar, I would be ready. Because this time the truth wouldn't explode. It would land softly. Like a whisper in the middle of a prayer. I stood there, watching him lie through his teeth. Thinking I was still the fool. But little did he know. The stage was already set. Glow showing Europe, Africa. If you're holding your breath right now, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe what happens next. The church was full. Every pew lined with faces glowing in anticipation. Fresh flowers hung from the aisle seats, their scent heavy in the air. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, casting warm colors across the altar. It was beautiful. Exactly what Samantha had dreamed of. Exactly what Liam had worked so hard to give her. He stood there beaming. My son. My baby boy. In his perfectly tailored suit, with his crooked tie that he insisted was his lucky charm. His hands were clasped in front of him, rocking gently on his heels, like a boy on Christmas morning waiting to open a gift he never imagined he'd receive. He didn't know. He had no idea. Rick was beside him. Best man. Perfect smile. Calm. Confident. Like the king of a kingdom he thought he still controlled. He scanned the room. Lips curled just slightly. Our eyes met once. He winked. Samantha entered on cue, draped in ivory and nerves. The guests stood. Gasps of admiration swept across the church. She was stunning, delicate, radiant, every bit the bride she was meant to be. But her steps were stiff. Her gaze uncertain. She avoided looking at Rick. She didn't look at me either. She focused only on Liam, as if clinging to the one thing that still felt safe. I sat in the front pew, composed, holding the silk clutch with both letters nestled quietly inside. I had rehearsed every moment in my mind, down to the timing of each breath. Not for drama, not for spectacle, but for precision, for truth. The ceremony began. The priest spoke of love, of patience, of honor. Words that once meant something to me. Liam kept glancing at Samantha with stars in his eyes. She smiled, but her lips were tight. Her hands trembled slightly as she held his. Then came the moment. The one every love story dares to challenge. If anyone here has reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. A pause. Polite. Expected. 1 second. 2. And then I rose. Not in a rush. Not with fury. But with the slow certainty of someone who has waited patiently for the silence to finish speaking. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled like wind through tall grass. Rick stiffened. Samantha froze. Liam turned to me confused. I walked forward. Quiet heels on polished stone. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I reached the altar and pulled the 2 envelopes from my clutch. One labeled Liam, the other Samantha. I handed them over calmly. The priest didn't stop me. The crowd held its breath. And I stepped back. Liam opened his first. His hands moved slowly, unsure, still holding on to hope that this was all just some kind of heartfelt motherly gesture. But as he read, the smile on his face collapsed. His chest rose unevenly. His hands began to tremble. The note was short. Just enough. Just the right words. You are the best thing I ever did. But I couldn't let you marry her without knowing the truth. I'm sorry. I love you, Mom. With the letter were photos, stamped dates, a screenshot of the hotel receipt, a copy of the message from Rick's phone. All printed, tangible, undeniable. Samantha's hands shook as she opened hers. She unfolded the paper. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Her knees buckled slightly. Liam turned to look at her, then at Rick, then back at me. Gasps echoed across the chapel. People began to whisper. Chairs creaked. Someone dropped a program. Samantha took 2 steps backward. One heel twisted on the edge of the carpet. She caught herself, then ran. Down the aisle. Away from the altar. From the truth. From him. Rick tried to move forward. Tried to speak. Tried to salvage whatever dignity he thought he still had. But I stepped in front of him. Just for a moment. Just long enough to say what I'd been holding in for days. I hope she was worth your son's heartbreak. He froze. And I walked away. I didn't wait for applause. Or for questions. Or for excuses. I didn't turn back to see the chaos unfold. I simply gathered my clutch, nodded once to Liam, who was still standing, paper clenched in hand, tears held back by sheer shock, and I left. Out the church doors. Into the daylight. Into the quiet. And just like that, the truth landed like a thunderclap. And this time, I was the one who walked away without a word. If this story hit you in the heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more powerful stories of silence, strength, and the kind of revenge that doesn't scream. It simply walks away. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done? 3 years later, my son is in therapy. He no longer speaks to his father. Or to Samantha. I don't blame him. I don't push. I just sit with him when he lets me. And when he doesn't, I wait outside the room, quietly, like I did all those years ago when he was little and scared of thunderstorms. He doesn't ask me why I did it the way I did. But I think he knows. I think part of him understands that if I'd screamed, if I'd made it about anger, about vengeance, about public shame, it would have broken something in him far worse than a wedding day. Instead, I let the truth speak for itself. I let it fall into his hands so he could decide what to do with it. There are days he still wakes up from dreams, sweating, fists clenched. He doesn't always say what they're about, but I don't need to ask. I know the face that still haunts him. I know the voice that used to comfort him, and now sends him straight into silence. Betrayal doesn't heal with time. It heals with truth, and even that takes its toll. Rick tried to reach out. First through emails. Then a letter. One of those long, meandering apologies that says everything except the one thing that matters. I knew exactly what I was doing. He never said that. He never owned it. He never could. He married someone else last year. A woman half his age. Her smile reminds me of Samantha's. I wonder if she notices the way his eyes linger a little too long. If she's felt that quiet tension and hasn't named it yet. I wonder if she still thinks she's special. Or if she's already questioning her own reflection. Samantha vanished after that day. Her parents came to collect her things. No words. Just shame in their eyes. And something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe guilt. Maybe disbelief that their perfect daughter had done something so grotesquely imperfect. I never saw her again. And I don't need to. People in town stopped asking. At first, they whispered in grocery store aisles and paused when I entered the post office. But over time they forgot. They always do. People move on. They need to believe stories like mine are rare, anomalies, too strange to be real. But they are real. And they happen more than anyone admits. I still have the letters. Liam's folded and worn at the edges. He keeps it tucked in a small wooden box on his nightstand. He once told me it reminds him that even when everything else failed, I didn't. That's enough for me. I walk every morning now. Same trail. Same rhythm. It helps me breathe. It reminds me that healing isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or breakthroughs. Sometimes, it comes in the form of putting one foot in front of the other on a dirt path while the world spins quietly around you. People tell me I was brave, that I handled it with grace. But that's not what it felt like. It felt like holding my breath for months while my heart bled in silence. It felt like burying every scream under a practiced smile. It felt like dying in pieces, until there was nothing left but steel. But I'm still here. Whole somehow. Wiser. Calmer. And quieter. Because silence, I've learned, isn't weakness. It's power. It's clarity. It's knowing exactly who you are, and choosing not to explain it to people who never deserved your truth to begin with. I don't visit that church anymore. I drive past it sometimes. I see the weddings. The laughter. The brides who still believe. And I smile for them. I hope they're right. I hope they never have to stand where I stood, but if they do, I hope they know this. That the loudest strength is sometimes the quietest voice in the room. That walking away without raising your voice can be the fiercest act of love. That you can protect the people you love, even when they don't know they need protecting. Thank God I chose silence. And that silence saved him.